Good morning. Let me invite you to grab your Bibles with me and turn to Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, we're going to go verses 32 to 42. Mark 14. If you don't have a Bible with you, we would invite you to grab one out of a pew rack nearby and turn to Mark 14 and follow along with us. If you don't own a Bible, we would actually love for you to just take that one as our gift to you. I am going to read this text, verses 32 to 42, and then when I'm done, I am going to remind us who it is that we are dealing with here and who it is that we are to be here in order to hear from by saying, "This is the word of the living God." And then you are going to praise that living God who has given us this great word in response by saying, "All glory be to Christ." Verse 32, Mark 14. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even unto death. Remain here and watch." And going a little further, he fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It's enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." This is the word of the living God. Father, we praise you for your word. We thank you for your Son. God, we would ask that we would, to a large degree, God, if it would please you, a greater degree than we ever have before, feel the weight of who it is that we are dealing with here. Feel the gravity of who it is that is speaking to us. God, see the beauty of this revealed Son in this horrible garden. Father, that you would, for the sake of your name, let us behold your Son in ways we had not before. God, so that we would see your beauty and your glory, might you lift the pages of this text off of this piece of paper in front of us and drive them into our hearts and our minds and stir our affections with them. God, might you shape us and mold us and press us and crush us where necessary. Might you lift us up if needed or take us low if necessary. God, might you meet us in this room where we are by your Spirit, and God, be pleased to not leave us there. For your fame and our joy. Amen. So what we have before us is an account of of Jesus in a garden. The garden's called Gethsemane. It's in a valley just outside of Jerusalem. It would sit slightly below Jerusalem. This is a familiar valley to Jesus. He has been here on other occasions to pray and to seek the face of God. But what we are about to see here is language and really a flavor in this text that you are not going to find anywhere else. In the mind of Mark, what Jesus goes under in this garden is worse than the physical suffering that Jesus endures on the cross. What you see here is a tremendous travail that Jesus goes under that, quite honestly, I don't think any human is ever going to be able to understand, and yet I think it would be good for us to try. Jesus walks into this garden, Gethsemane. He says to these disciples that are with him, just out off of the Lord's Supper, the last Passover and the first institution of the Lord's table. They have sung a hymn together, and they've gone out to the Mount of Olives. He has just told them that all of them are going to fall away. Naturally, Peter says, "No, I'm not going to." And then the rest of them say, "No, I won't either." And so Jesus, with that setting, full bellies from the Passover meal, fresh instruction that the Passover meal now means a thing that it has never meant before, singing one of the Psalms, and now going to Gethsemane to pray. This would not have been uncommon. Jesus has done this multiple times. He says to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." Verse 33, and then he takes with him Peter, James, and John. Nothing surprising there. These are his three closest friends. These are the ones that are his inner circle. He says to them, "Come with me." Verse 33, and he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." Now those two words, greatly distressed and troubled, are fascinating words because of what the meaning underneath of the English translation is. You have sort of this idea. Jesus is being really shaken in this moment, kind of rocked in this moment. There's a flavor here of bewilderment, of overwhelming fear, of an extreme anxiety, of uncertainty. One commentator says of a terrible, terrible surprise. That really, if you take Jesus at his word, and you should, that really catches him off guard a bit. And he even says out loud to his disciples, "My soul is sorrowful, even unto death." Now, Jesus is not doing there what we so often do, which is, "I feel like I'm going to die because you missed breakfast." Jesus there is actually under such a profound weight of distress that actually he is saying, "I feel as though I may die." Now, keep in mind, he knows that he is about to die. But he's supposed to die on a hill called Calvary, not in a garden called Gethsemane. Luke, the doctor, tells us that in these moments, Jesus begins to sweat drops of blood. That is actually a thing that can medically happen under extreme, extreme duress. And Jesus is under that sort of distress. There is nothing else like this in the entire Bible. There is nothing. You can go through and read the psalmist where he gets very, very transparent about the travail he is under, it's nothing like this. You can read of David's sorrow at the loss of Absalom. You can just over and over and over again, you can read accounts. I mean, you can go read the crucifixion, and we'll be there in a bit, but there is nothing in the whole Bible that has this sort of weighty difficulty to it, like what Jesus is going under right here. I said it, and I will just say it one more time. It would seem as though to Mark, okay, who's writing this gospel, it would seem as though to Mark, what Jesus is undergoing here is worse than the physical side of the crucifixion. Now, Jesus says to his disciples, "Come, I'm under tremendous weight and pain and agony and travail. Will you guys stay here, and will you watch? And will you pray?" In verse 35, he leaves. So if you're tracking with this, just kind of is how this has gone. He enters the garden, and it would have had a fence around it. And Jesus probably knew the owner of the garden, and that owner had perhaps given him permission to be there. And Jesus goes in and he leaves some of the disciples, the majority of them, outside, near the gate. And then he goes in a bit further into the darkness of the garden, and he says, all he says to the first group is sit here and wait, basically. Then he goes in a little further, and with the three, he says to them, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm going under. My soul is sorrowful like it has never been before, even unto death. You stay here and you watch. And then Jesus leaves the three and goes in a little further. And the text says that he fell on the ground. Now, it would not be uncommon to pray on your knees or even on your face, but it appears as though what we have here is that Jesus is unable to stand under the weight of what he's about to go under. And so he falls to the ground and he prays. And this is what he says. He prays that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, verse 36, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me." That word Abba, I think you probably know, perhaps maybe you don't. In Aramaic, that would be a very, very a term of intimacy. It would be like my kids coming to me and calling me Dada or Daddy. That's what Jesus is doing here with his Father. I don't think that this is the first time that Jesus has done this, though it is the first time it is recorded. That's what he prays. Abba, Father, Daddy, Dad, I know that all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Now, I think that if you have enough time to think about this sort of travail that Jesus is going under, if I give you enough time to think about it, especially in light of where we have been in Mark, I think you would agree that this is a bit surprising. I want you to know that it is supposed to be surprising. Given enough time to think about it, I think you'll find it eventually surprising for a few reasons. The first is that Jesus has told the disciples that he's going to die. He's told them that on a number of occasions. Jesus knows that he is the final Passover lamb. Jesus just told them that his blood will be poured out for many. Up to this point, what you have seen from Jesus is sort of what you might expect to see from him. A sense of coolness, a sense of calm, a sense of resolve. He rides in to Jerusalem on a donkey, knowing that he is not the king that the people want him to be. This king is going to die. He knows it. And he's known it all along. So that's interesting. I think the other thing that's interesting about it is that, and I am certainly not the first to make this observation, that Jesus here, looking at his death that is coming, is handling it in a way that, if you've ever watched a movie before, ever, that heroes aren't supposed to handle it. Typically, your hero in the movie sees what's coming, stands up, takes it like a man. I mean, that's why they're the hero. There's this kind of, and even in ancient Greek writing, you can read about this. Like there's a certain stoicism and a certain resolve and a certain, kind of chest thumping as you face whatever it is that's coming for you. You do not see that here from Jesus. You just don't. Now, probably because you think that that's the way he's supposed to be, you probably read that sort of chest-thumping hero into this without actually seeing that that is the furthest thing from who Jesus is right now. He is no Braveheart. This is not Mel Gibson. This is not whoever else it has been facing their. Forget about the movies. You should read Fox's Book of Martyrs, and when you read that, what you see is men and women facing a terrible hour of death, and doing so, singing hymns and praising God, and with a quiet sometimes, but always confident resolve. Jesus is not the first person to be crucified on a Roman cross. The Romans invented it, basically. So people argue about that. Certainly no one argues about this. They perfected it. He knew it was coming because he told us. And yet he goes to the cross, unlike a hero should go to the cross. Pastor Josh alluded to it earlier, writer to the Hebrews chapter 5. Basically, paraphrasing it, Jesus cries out, sheds tears, begs God, can we do this another way? I'm not going to pause here. I would like to. And I would like for you to just steep in that for a bit. I would like for you to steep in that for a bit, and I would like for you to think about the fact that this is Jesus' humanity on display here. I would like for you to think about how on a movie screen it is easy to have a character who is the hero thump their chest. I would like for you to read Fox's Book of Martyrs and give God praise and glory for the fact that his Spirit, who indwelled those men and women, gave them resolve. And then I would like for you to ask yourself, so what is going on here? And then I would like for you to see that Jesus is facing something that no other human being ever has or will face. And then I would like for you to ask, what is it that he is facing? This word that I, sometime a while ago, I was surprised to see it, but I was glad I did it, but I don't know why I did it, but I drew a box, and I do this in my Bible as a way to look at this. I drew a box around that word began. And I'm glad I did it because I was trying to figure out what's going on here, and then I was like, oh, I drew a box around that. I think I might have drawn a box around that for a reason. And I think the reason I drew the box around the word began is because it's a significant word. Because again, he knew that this was coming. But he goes into the garden and he began to feel this way. In other words, he hadn't always been feeling this and he wasn't suppressing it. He began because he saw something. He saw something that no one else ever has seen before. And what he saw, he tells us in verse 36. Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this, what's that word? Cup. Remove this cup from me. Now, it will do you very little good to define the word cup by yourself. And unfortunately, lots of people have tried. Oh, the cup means this, the cup means that. The Old Testament tells us exactly what the cup means. It means this. The cup is the wrath of God. It is the judgment of God. You can go read about this in Isaiah 51, verse 17, where the cup is a cup of wrath. It is a cup of staggering. It is judgment. You look upon the cup and you stagger, according to Isaiah. Do you know what Jesus is doing? He's looking at the cup. Do you know what the cup causes him to do? Stagger. Do you know why? Because the cup of God's judgment is unspeakably and surprisingly terrible. When Jesus looks into the cup, I think he sees that in this hour he will be bearing the sins of the world. And he knew that. He told us that. I will give my life as a ransom for many. But in giving his life as a ransom for many, you have to ask yourself, well, how does that work? Well, here's how it works. He takes your sin, my sin. He takes your sin and my sin upon himself. And that will bring judgment. And the judgment will be multifaceted. I will point out two of them to you. Two of the facets of judgment. Two of the results of sin. The first result of sin is that when you sin, sin brings alienation and separation. And Jesus knows that when he bears our sin, he will be separated or alienated from God. He must undergo what we deserve. He will be separated and alienated from God, and he knows that. Now, I've told you this multiple times. I pray it never grows old to your ears. A biblical understanding of Jesus' relationship with God the Father brings you to this conclusion. He has, from eternity past, in the Trinity, as the second member of the Trinity, enjoyed perfect fellowship and communion with God the Father to this point, and it has never been broken from eternity past. This is Jesus' greatest joy. Harmony, communion with the Father and the Spirit. And he knows that part of that cup, part of that judgment, part of being a sin bearer is that fellowship, that communion will be broken on the cross. He will cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, once upon a time, I think in order to lessen the horrors of the cross, I had someone come and correct me on that and say that when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's not a literal forsaking. Rather, that because Jesus was bearing our sin, he could no longer see that God was still near to him. And the result of that is as though he wasn't actually forsaken, he just thought he was. To which I respectfully say, to hell with that notion. Because it is not true. Because the last thing that you would want to try to do in that moment is change the meaning of Jesus' words as though this was a pretend forsakenness. That the cup it wasn't that bad. No, it was horrible. It was terrible. And my question to that line of thought would be this. So do you think that hell is a real forsaking, or is it just a fake one? Is hell a figurative forsaking, or is it actual? Actually, your answer to that doesn't really matter because the Bible tells us it is actual. And since it's an actual forsaking, you know what needs to happen for you to avoid that actual forsaking for eternity is that someone needs to undergo actual forsakenness in your place. Jesus is that man. So sin brings separation and alienation. Jesus knows that. He has never experienced broken fellowship with the Father, and he's about to. But second, other facet to the cross, sin brings punishment. Sin brings punishment. It must. For God to be loving, he must be angry. He must be angry at sin. That should not be a profound thought. For if God is loving, and he is, he must be angry. You sit back and watch with indifference terrible things happen to your children. I conclude one thing about you: you don't love them. You sit back and with indifference watch someone do something harmful to someone you love, and with indifference yawn at it. I conclude you don't love them. And God is more loving than we could possibly imagine, which means he must be angry. He must have wrath at sin. He must. And he does. We were talking about this in my gospel community group on Thursday, that what happens on the cross is that God takes all of the sins, all of them. Now let's just think about that for a second. All of the things that God has told you to do and you have not done. And all of the things that God has told you not to do and you have done. For every person who will ever trust in Jesus Christ, God takes all of that sin. That's a lot of people. John tells us in Revelation, myriads and myriads, innumerable people who have committed innumerable sins. God takes all of them. He imputes or places them upon his Son. These are all of the sins that all of those people have committed in all of their lives. All of the horizontal sins, all of the unkind words, all of the unloving actions, all of the indifference, which is all, before it can ever be horizontally aimed, is first vertically directed at God. All of that, for all of their lives, for all of those people, on his Son. In a moment, in time and space, at a historical event where Jesus is crucified. In that moment, all of that on the Son. And then God takes all of the wrath that all of those people deserve for all of their sins, and he focuses it like a laser beam onto his Son. You could think of it as a cup of judgment, a very, very large cup of judgment. And he allows the waters of his wrath to pour out onto the head of his Son. Do you know what we do when we're about to face something unpleasant? We look away. We look away. On the unpleasant occasions where I have needed to be stabbed by a needle, the person doing it sees my wavering resolve and that I am more pale than usual. When the needle comes out, what do they say? Look away. Look away. This happened yesterday and it struck me as profound. My daughter came upstairs and said, "Dad, this part of the movie is scary." I said, "Don't look at it. Look away." I would submit to you for you to think about the reason that Jesus began to be greatly distressed, began to be terribly surprised, began to feel as though he was going to die. The reason that that began to happen is because God said, "Son, this is the cup, and you will not look away. I will show it to you. You will see it before you feel it. And son, you must see and feel the acute suffering before you go under it." Now, when Jesus says, "Remove this cup from me," do you think he's asking if God can find another way? My answer to that is absolutely yes. Has God found another way in the past? Sure. How about Genesis 22, where God says to Abraham, "Take your son, your one and only special son, up on that hill and sacrifice him to me." And that is exactly what Abraham does. He lays his boy on the altar. He pulls out his knife. He is just about to plunge it into the chest of his son, and a voice comes from heaven, the voice of God. "Abraham, don't do it. I have provided a substitute. The cup has passed." Only, of course, you would know this by now. This time there will be no voice. This time the knife in the Father's hand will plunge into the chest of his one and only Son. This time, unlike the ram provided as a substitute in Genesis 22, this time Jesus will be our substitute. There is no other way. Jesus sees this. Jesus surrenders to this. Jesus says, "Father God, it's ultimately not what I want, it's what you want. Yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping. After telling them what he told them and undergoing what he had undergone, and he said to them, "Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing." The human spirit is willing, but the flesh, your body is weak. Boys, minutes ago, Peter, minutes ago, you're telling me that you will die with me. You can't even stay awake an hour. Again, he went away and he prayed, saying the same thing, feeling the same thing, undergoing the same thing, seeing the same thing. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And they did not know what to answer him. What would you say? Their bellies are full of Passover lamb. They have drank the wine. It has been a long day. But none of those answers were good. And he came the third time and said, "Are you still sleeping, taking your rest? It is enough. It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners." Now, I hope that you see now that it would be a great mistake to have Jesus fighting out of one corner against sin and death and hell and the devil and the religious establishment and the Roman government, and that as the two corners whose fighters converge in the middle, somehow behind Jesus cheering him on are a bunch of the faithful. That would be incorrect. Jesus will go to the center of the ring, but he will go it alone. You and I do not help him save us. You and I were not along the way encouraging him. You and I, good intentions for sure. You and I have failed and we have fled and we have fallen asleep. There is one faithful man, and only one, and he will go it alone. Jesus ends by saying, "Rise, get up, get off the ground. Let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." I found it interesting, and it at least made me think about this. In my Bible, those are the last words on the page. And then you turn the page to continue, and we'll be there next week. And I thought to myself, if I did not know that there was another page, and you asked me, being unfamiliar with the story and unfamiliar with Jesus, what do you think happened here? My answer would reflect that of what everyone else in this situation would have done, which is this: this is going to be terrible. I don't have to do this. The people I am doing this for can't even stay awake for an hour. Well-intentioned all day long, but unable to follow through and finish what they've said they're going to do. The agony of this is going to be unbearable. My betrayer is right over there. It's dark. I can get out of here. I'm leaving. I'm gone. I am done. You boys stay here and sleep. That's what everyone else would have said. So the conversation I had with myself earlier this week was, so what really happened? So what actually happened? Well, here's what actually happened. This is going to be terrible. The people I'm doing this for don't deserve it. They can't even stay awake an hour. They have fallen asleep and fled and run off. I am about to undergo something for them that they do not deserve. Here comes the guy who's going to betray me. He brought some Roman soldiers with him as though he needed them. Peter, James, John, get up. Let's be going. Let's not be going out the back of the garden to run away from this. Let's be going. We're going to walk out here. I'm going to meet Judas face to face, and we're going to do this. I am going to get this done. I pray that the beauty of what actually happened is not lost on us. Everyone else runs out the back of the garden. Only one grabs his unfaithful, about to betray him, run off and hide disciples. Only one grabs them, and only one walks out to undergo the thing that he has just pondered he's about to undergo that almost killed him. Only one. James Edwards, and I modified his quote slightly, but James Edwards said something along these lines: in a valley below the city, Jesus' soul is utterly crushed. And soon, on a hill just above that same city, his body will be too. Now, don't you on some level have to say to Jesus, at least in your own mind, why would you do that? Now listen, don't scoff at that question. Don't scoff at that. That's our problem is that we don't ask the question, we just assume it. Don't scoff at that question. Jesus, why would you do that? And maybe you should be careful with your first answer. Not necessarily because your first answer is wrong, but because perhaps it's maybe not thought out well enough. I don't know what your first answer is. This was not my first answer, but I asked the question, why would you do that? Well, because there was a garden once where God's son Adam lived. And God said to Adam, "Obey me, and I will bless you." But Adam disobeyed, and he was cursed. And you and I have been living under that curse forever. But there was another garden and a better son. And what God said to the second Adam is this: obey me, and I will curse you. And where the first Adam failed, the second Adam did not. And he was in fact cursed, so that you and I can be blessed forever. Now listen to me very, very carefully. I want to keep you from making a terrible error at this moment. That does not make you awesome. That does not mean that you are great. That does not mean that you ought to be applauded. That does not mean that you are the center of the universe. The cross of Jesus Christ is not about how awesome you are. The cross of Jesus Christ, and you already know what I'm about to say, is about how awesome He is. This ought to be, and has historically been, the refrain of biblical Christianity. Forget this new abomination called I'm Awesome Christianity. Biblical, historical Christianity has been, He is awesome, all glory be to Christ. So, Father, let us not stroll in here haphazardly and try to steal from you a share of your glory and make it our own. It belongs to you. All glory belongs to you. It was your Son who has undergone these things so that for your glory we wouldn't have to. It is your Son who succeeded where the first Adam failed. It is your Son who has brought us out from under the curse and into the land of blessing. It is your Son who would freely forgive any and all in this room who would run to Him for salvation. It is your Son who has provided a means from which we can hide in the cleft of the rock and not be destroyed by your holiness. It is your Son who will receive our praise and our glory in this moment and for all of eternity. It is your Son who wakes up sleepers like us. So we give all glory to Him. And the church said,